everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I am your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Carrie Kisker. Carrie Kisker is the president of Kisker Education Consulting in Los Angeles, California. Dr. Kisker is a highly respected thought leader in higher education, advising college leaders on entrepreneurship and innovation, program and policy development, strategic planning, and civic engagement. In addition to her consulting work, she leads the Center for the Study of Community Colleges, where she spearheads groundbreaking research on community college practice and policy with funding from organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Spencer Foundation. As an accomplished author, Dr. Kisker has co-written several essential books, including The American Community College and Creating Entrepreneurial Community Colleges, a design thinking approach, shaping the conversation around higher education reform. With a PhD in higher education from UCLA and a passion for fostering democratic engagement in learning institutions, she is driving meaningful change in the academic world. You can find Carrie on LinkedIn by searching Carrie Kisker or by going to her website, kiskerconsulting.com. Hello, Carrie. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Thanks, Olivia. I'm really happy to be talking with you today.
To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Carrie Kisker?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I've thought about this, and I think success really has meant a number of different things to me over the course of my career. In the early days, right after I finished my PhD in higher education, success to me meant building a career that was sort of substantively different from the careers that most PhD students take. Most go into the faculty, or they go into a government or policy position. And I really wanted to create something different for myself. I had this idea that I liked working with community college research and scholarship, but to me, it needed to be really applied, and it needed to be able to inform those working directly in the colleges. So I started my consulting practice, Kisker Education Consulting, and I began consulting with various community colleges around the country. And so success at that point kind of meant getting the next job and validating this sort of made up career for myself that I had an inkling might work. And also trying to stay involved in the scholarship and the research around community colleges, because even though I wasn't employed by a university as most of my colleagues were and are, I really wanted to stay involved in that space. So I think, success then changed a little bit for me after I got through that fake it till you make it period. And I had little kids, and I wanted to, I think, success maybe for most professional women means some sort of balance between doing the work you want to do professionally, which for me meant traveling to work with different colleges, giving speeches to educators and scholars, writing my books, and also, being there to coach the soccer teams and go to the school plays and do all that stuff. I think I've gotten better at that over the years, and it certainly has gotten easier as the kids are now teenagers. But, I'm probably not alone in the fact that this is the most elusive definition of success for a lot of us. It's a bit of a constant struggle. But interestingly, I think this attempt at balance has really underlined how I define success largely today, which is, my main goal and drive for the next 5 years, for example, is to work primarily through the Center for the Study of Community Colleges to create an infrastructure and a network of support that can help promote the amazing work that's done across our field, not just by me and the colleagues that I'm working most closely with. To write the kinds of books that are really foundational to the work we do, but aren't really rewarded by, if you're a faculty looking for tenure and promotion at a university. And also to help support the practical work that's happening on the ground on community colleges every day. So, I think that's how I'm really defining if I can be successful today, I can sort of act as a platform for the others around me who are doing similar and in many cases even better work than I'm doing. But the one through line from the start of my career till now has been my desire to bridge the worlds of research and practice. There's some excellent scholarship being done on community colleges and their students, and there's some really difficult and challenging, but very rewarding work on community college campuses, from college leaders, faculty, trustees, staff, and so forth. So everything I've done over the past 20 years and everything I want to continue to do is all in service of tightening that connection between research and practice so that community colleges can be even more successful in changing the trajectories of people's lives and powering the workforce that we all need for the future.
I think that was a great way to also demonstrate not only how success can change and the different aspects of what achieving success looks like to you, but also highlighting that in a time and even now, when most of your colleagues, like you said, are working at universities, you said, wait, my passion lies in a deeper place. And even if I have to create what that looks like, I'm going to take the leap and create that because I know that's where I can make the impact. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, especially when we're working so diligently and so hard to work towards something, especially when it's like, okay, here's the path. You go to high school, you go to college, you get your master's, your PhD, and like it's like all the steps, and then you graduate, and it's like, okay, what now? It can
Exactly.
be like just follow the path, but that area of known unknown for individuals like yourself, who was like, wait, I know just following the next step, that next brick, whatever it might be, in forging my path forward is not realistically what I want to do and how I can make that impact. For you over the years, how has that been when others might not understand what you're doing, or it is such, I don't want to say such an outlier, but it is obviously an outlier and a different course that when you're trying to benchmark where you are, where you want to be, there's not really others in your field where you could go, okay, let me pick their brain on this, or, that. So, how has that been for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are times when it's been really challenging because I don't have that model. There are people like me who have a foot in both worlds, but the majority of them, I'd say, came out of that traditional career path where I'm thinking of a fantastic woman named Dr. Deborah Bragg, for example, who was a professor at the University of Illinois and ran a big center out of the University of Illinois. And then when she retired, she started a consulting practice, and she does a lot of that similar bridging research and practice work that I do too. But I started from maybe a lesser starting point than she did. I skipped the 25 years at a university. So I had to sort of justify what expertise I had and what I knew about this and what I could bring that might be different. To some extent, I still have to do that, even though I think I'm a little bit better known now. Um, but I just let the results speak for themselves. I got a lot of jobs. I still get a lot of jobs, but especially in the early days, I would have a mentor or somebody I knew who would introduce me to someone who would then hire me to do a job. And if I did that job well, they would hire me for something else, or they would tell their colleague at another institution. And so I've done very little cold calling in my career. I think I've been lucky on that front, and just let the impact that I have been fortunate enough to have on these institutions speak for them for themselves. But the other thing that really gave, pardon me, that gave me a leg up is, I was really fortunate to have a lot of mentors in my career who, while they did not do the same thing that I was doing in terms of the shape of their career, took me under their wings and included me in a lot of projects or got me that first introduction to the first job and that sort of thing. And my advisor in graduate school, Dr. Arthur Cohen, was sort of known as the grandfather of community college studies. He wrote the first 5 editions of the American Community College. But about 15 years ago, he invited me to write the 6th edition of that book with him and his colleague and wife, Dr. Florence Brower. And so I came in and was really the 3rd author and a contributor for sure, but the lesser contributor on that book 15 years ago. And but that catapulted me into a whole new stratosphere, I think, because that book is read in every master's and graduate program in higher education, or at least any of them that talk at all about community colleges. And it's used by nearly all administrators as a reference guide in community colleges. So all of a sudden, I sort of had a name for myself because I had been invited to participate in that book. And that built on itself and allowed me to, continue to prove myself in other ways. And then, eventually I took over and became the first author for the 7th edition of the American Community College, which came out about 18 months ago, and other books as well. But I think those bona fides, if I helped establish me a little bit, and I had something to fall back on and say, no, I'm legitimate.
And I want to touch upon that statement that you just said there with some other things you've kind of said throughout our conversation up to this point is a lot of times community colleges, students exit and their peers sometimes, or people looking at resumes, look at, oh, you went to a community college. And there's this, as you said, kind of feeling earlier of like a fake it till you make it scenario that they then have to go through because they're like, wait, how real is this? This level of kind of, you said earlier, like your experience of like bridging that gap of 25 years experience that some of your peers had and creating that. And now I feel like a lot of community colleges, yes, they're getting more and more up to speed, but there's been this big stigma around individuals who decide to go to community college for whatever reason, that when they leave, they have to kind of fight the current with around that. So why did you decide to get into the research and helping community colleges? And expanding on that, how have you found similarities in how people look at community colleges comparative to individuals who decide to pave their own path?
Sure. Well, I'll start with your first question, which is I had when I started my PhD program at UCLA, I had no intention of studying community colleges. I didn't really have a lot of experience with them. Um, I knew of them, but I had gone straight to a 4-year college, and then worked in marketing for a couple of years before I decided that I was really passionate about education and wanted to go back. But I interviewed with a number of professors at UCLA back in 2001, maybe something like that. And one of them was the man who ended up being my advisor and mentor, Art Cohen. And he was sort of this very imposing, tall, bald man with big, thick black glasses. And he was sort of gruff, right? Like he was really intimidating, especially for a 20-something-year-old. And I sat down in his office and he just sort of stared at me for a minute, and I'm visibly shaking in my boots. And he said, "Why do you want to study higher education?" And I sort of blurted out something that was heartfelt, but, not super thought through in a big way, which was like, I care about things like access and equity to the system. And I had been so fortunate to have just an amazing college experience. And I'm aware that a lot of students don't have those opportunities, and I would like to expand that and so forth. And he just sort of took a beat, and then he looked at me and said, "Well, Carrie, if you're really interested in issues of access and equity, you have to study community colleges." And that statement, I mean, he said a lot of wise things to me over the 20 or so years that I was able to work with him, but that statement has stood out as sort of the defining moment in my life and my career where, it would have been really easy to study the most elite in selective institutions. I think there's a lot of glitz and glamour around that in the higher education circles. They get the most attention, the most funding, and so forth. But if I really wanted to make a difference in our field, I had to study community colleges. So that's how it came to this path. Your second question, I think, has to do with stigma, and this is something that really just infuriates me in some ways. One of my biggest pet peeves, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, college is not for everyone. Have you heard that in some ways? And people tend to say stuff like this a lot, and I think what they really mean is a bachelor's degree or a 4-year residential college experience is not for everyone. And I agree with those statements a lot. I mean, I don't think 100% of our population needs to have a bachelor's degree, and I don't think everyone can or should go to a 4-year college right after high school. But when you say college is not for everyone, you're clearly excluding community colleges from your definition of college. And I think that continues to feed a lot of the stigmatizing and often misleading perceptions about these institutions, right? And the people who attend them. So you might laugh, but about a year ago, I made up a t-shirt that simply says community college is college. And I sometimes wear this shirt when I'm giving speeches to audiences that are not super familiar with the work that community colleges do, to just remind them that college is inclusive of all kinds of education and training. You can go to college and become a doctor or a banker or a lawyer, but you can also go to college and become a nurse or a solar panel installer or an entrepreneur or a supply chain manager. And some of these positions are going to offer 6-figure salaries right out of college, right? Much higher than a lot of bachelor's degree recipients are earning right away. And, regardless of where you go to college, I think you're going to ideally learn how to think critically. You're going to learn how to engage with others who hold different viewpoints. You're going to learn how to collaborate and communicate and think in an innovative way. And this is what college is really about. And that can be accomplished just as easily in a workforce-oriented program at a community college than it can be at Harvard or Michigan State or UT Austin or wherever. So that stigma, I think, exists, and I think there are active steps that we can do to combat it, right? So you asked about employers, and I think that moving the resumes of applicants for jobs that have community college on their resumes to the top of the stack is a really positive and concrete thing that people can do to combat this stereotype, right? And not just because it's the right thing to do, not because you're giving a chance to somebody who hasn't had as much of a chance before, but because for some jobs, people with a community college degree or certificate are going to be substantially better equipped to do that job than someone with a bachelor's degree, right? So instead of moving that resume down to the bottom of the pile, maybe the employer asks a few more questions. And, I guarantee I think they're going to find someone who is persistent, someone who is dedicated, someone who's going to be willing to take chances and do what's necessary to be successful in their next job, because they've probably had to work really hard to overcome some obstacles in their life just to get to that point. So, checking our biases, which we all have, right? Like that's not necessarily a bad thing, but just sort of being aware of that and being more curious about, oh, look, this applicant came from a community college. I wonder what their story is. I wonder what strengths they might bring to this position that, maybe a more traditional applicant doesn't have in the same way. I think that could be really useful.
And it made me think when you were talking about this too, about a conversation I had a handful of years ago. I went to Quinnipiac University, and after I graduated undergrad and before I went back to get my master's and teach there was a press release that went out to all current students, families, faculty, alumni, the whole gamut. And a new partnership was formed with one of the community colleges in Connecticut, and they could do their 2 years at the community school and then get into Quinnipiac. And I remember so many of my peers who, again, got their degree there, paid a lot of money to go there, went up in arms like, how can they be doing this? It's going to delude the classroom, the stature of students we bring out, this and that. And I took a step in that moment and I go, but why? Because yes, I understand it if we look at it across the board and we look at it from both sides. Okay, well, is there still the criteria that any other student would need to enter to get into the university? And when you did some research, yes. You know, if you transferred grades from a different university, depending on, you know, what it was and what the class was, it needed to have a certain GPA and a certain grade level. So are those still in place? When the answer comes to be yes, their first reaction was, well, it's just this community college being said. And that means it's going to, you know, we're not going to get the same education because they're going to have to dilute things and this is going to happen. And I'm like, wait a second, ask the questions because it sounds like right now it's out of fear and not taking any time to go, what could
100%.
this mean? Could it mean that you don't have to pay the 4 years of tuition to go to this university when you could potentially only afford 2 years?
Right.
What does that look like? Are we going to be able to have more diverse conversations? Are we going to be able to have this and that in the classroom setting? And when you look at it, and I decided to dive deeper into it, and it was the same across the board, I said, they have to do everything any other student who wants to transfer to our university or take a summer class, not at the school, has to go through. You're not diluting anything. Actually, we're expanding on the knowledge in our peers by doing this and diversification. And that's sadly, to your point, part of the, like, it can start right there.
You're 100% right. I mean, I think there's this stigma about community colleges and the students who attend them as being second best, right? Like literally, there's a term second best or last chance institutions that have been applied to community colleges. But really, those stigmas exist simply because community colleges are not selective in their admissions, right? Like they take anyone who wants to come, and many of the people who want to come already have a bachelor's or master's degree and are coming back for training. But I think that the stigma that if you attended a community college is in your past, it was because you were not smart or motivated enough to go right to a four-year institution is just untrue. But it sort of mirrors an assumption that we make more broadly, which is essentially to equate cost with quality, right? If you are paying for Quinnipiac University your freshman year, your first year, then you are paying for a higher quality education. And we also know that that's, just not true. I think luckily for community colleges, though, um, the public perceptions of them are starting to change, or at least in some ways are not as negative as they used to be. Um, or at a minimum, they're sort of neutral right now. Like we're in this period of time when higher education, and in particular our most selective and elite institutions, are really being battered in the media. I mean, every day there's a news story that's literally talking about how some foundational tentpole of academia is being attacked or broken down. And distrust in our educations is at an all-time high. And, fortunately for community colleges, a lot of time they're flying under the radar a little bit on this front. I have an article in Change Magazine coming out in a couple of days, and in it we wrote that if community colleges are thought of at all in these conversations, they're thought of in the context of job training and not critical race theory. So they sort of escape some of the vitriol that's aimed at the more selective institutions. The hard part about this, though, is that the damage that these accusations cause are probably even more devastating at community colleges than they are at the more elite four-year institutions, simply because of the vulnerability of the populations that community colleges serve. But interestingly, we're also starting to see some really positive perceptions about community colleges in the media and in the general public. The Lumina Foundation did a study maybe 2 years ago now, where they analyzed media narratives across all forms of media related to higher education. And one of the bright spots in that analysis was that community colleges are considered higher ed's quote unquote best kept secret. So, low cost colleges that offer everything from transfer preparation to, training leading to industry related credentials and so forth. A place where people can improve their prospects for a very low cost. And I think this is great. I'm glad to see some public, narratives of the colleges that are positive, but this shouldn't be a well-kept secret, right? Like we know this. If you really think about it, community colleges are not a secret. They've been around 100 years and they've been really changing people's lives and the economic opportunities in communities for all this time. So we should all be shouting about this from the rooftops. And one of my big um, things that I talk about often is that we need to be telling the story of community colleges in a different way. Both community college leaders who are talking a lot to legislators and others, but the associations that represent them need to be publicizing the types of positive media narratives that exist and providing a lot of stories and anecdotes to back those up to really combat those stigmatizing and mischaracterizations of what community colleges do. That's not an easy thing to do necessarily. It takes a lot of time and resources and intention. But it has to be done because basically we have handed over control of our brand as a sector to the universities and to anybody else who has anything to say about community colleges, positive or negative. We've allowed these 1,000 or so colleges to be more defined by what they are not than by what they are and what they do, and how they change people's lives for the better. And that's really a shame.
Carrie, that being said, community colleges, as you mentioned, play a critical role in expanding access to higher education, yet they often face challenges in funding, transfer pathways that I just mentioned, and adapting to workforce demands.
Mhm.
Based on your extensive research and consulting experience, what do you see as the biggest untapped opportunity for community colleges to innovate and redefine their role in shaping the future of education? And what structural or policy changes would be necessary to make this vision a reality?
Mhm. Yeah, great question. I mean, I think one thing we can do today is sort of what I was just talking about, which is to tell our story, right? Like to define our brand in a more positive way. To talk about community colleges as I do as America's great superpower, right? They not only enable access to the system, but they promote mobility within that system. They educate and train our workers for tomorrow. They allow our universities to focus on the important things like engaging in research leading to medical and scientific breakthroughs. And they serve the most marginalized and vulnerable populations. We can do a much better job of redefining the impact of our work. So that's the first thing I would say. Um, but I have also done a lot of work, particularly in the last 5 years, advocating for community colleges to embrace an entrepreneurial mindset, to incent faculty and staff to think innovatively about how they can serve students and communities in new ways, and to really double down on the college's proven ability to be nimble and respond to community and workforce needs, right? And I'm not just talking about new ways of generating revenue, although I think that's important as well. But I think a spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship can be implemented across the college, right? In the classroom, in the boardroom, and everywhere in between. I published a book about 4 years ago. I think you noted this at the top, called Creating Entrepreneurial Community Colleges. And it's essentially a guide for how colleges can innovate and be entrepreneurial, and provides a lot of examples from institutions that have been really innovative in this way. Um, and to do that, I outline in the book what I call the design thinking approach to mission oriented change. Um, and it's essentially the idea that to be successful as an entrepreneurial or innovative community college, you need to really hold tightly to your core values, right? Um, so if your core value is and always has been serving your community, Great. Every design idea has to hold that as a non-negotiable. If a core value is, and it usually is, providing an accessible and equitable education for students, great. That becomes a non-negotiable in any design criteria that you're implementing for a new idea. So what I have found and what my book really demonstrates is then when community colleges can keep the needs of their students and the communities they serve, which is going to vary, right? Like there are 1,000 or so community colleges in really different communities across the United States. When they're able to keep these needs at the center of all they're doing, they're able to um, they're able to, as you said, find new ways of achieving what they're hoping to do and avoid falling into the sort of false, um, the fallacy that you can only maintain, let's say open access or provide a high quality education, or that by focusing on equity, you somehow fail in preparing all students for the jobs of tomorrow. So, you asked about structural or policy solutions. I think there are a lot of those that have to happen as well. But in the absence of major structural and policy solutions, I do think that there's a lot that community colleges can do to improve the ways they're serving students and communities and the workforce development needs. Um, that enable them to just be more nimble on their own. On top of that, yes, do we need more funding? 100% yes. Have we been disinvesting in community colleges and other institutions of higher education for 40 years? Yes, we have. Does that need to change? I sound like Donald Rumsfeld asking myself and answering my own questions. Yes, right. But we've been working to combat some of these structural problems for a long time, and they're really entrenched and they're hard, and there are a lot of other competing priorities in state and local governments. And sometimes you have a really hostile, national administration to higher education as well. So I don't think that we're going to make a lot of fundamental progress on some of these structural and policy things right away. And because of that, we need to focus on what we can do in our own classrooms and on our own campuses.
That being said, I want you to expand on that. If there was a few things that we could start for individuals who are involved in community colleges right now, where would they put their finger on the pulse and say, okay, we're going to bring this heartbeat alive and start right here? What are some of those fundamental things they can bring to the classroom or a student could bring to the classroom to really get things moving and conversations going about this?
Yeah, so I think some of it comes down to like pedagogical approaches,
Mhm.
and then some of it comes down to how you're structuring opportunities within the institution as a whole. So expanding internship opportunities in your community, even internships in maybe community organizations or advocacy or policy organizations, anything that will give students a sense of how they can have an effect on the world around them and the communities around them. I think those are all really positive steps, and that's really happening in a lot of classrooms already. From an institutional, more structural perspective, and again, I think this is happening too. College leaders can really create more and more connections with businesses in their regions, not only for workforce training purposes, which is fantastic, and can help bring new companies and new organizations to locales, right? Because there are the programs to develop the workforce needed to power those industries. But they can also, work with organizations to ask them to sponsor certain programs or donate equipment or interview students who are completing a degree or certificate, maybe even give those particular employers first right of refusal to hire graduates from certain programs. I think the more we're establishing deep connections into our communities, the more the communities and the businesses there are going to be really willing to support the colleges. And we're seeing that across the board everywhere, and those stories aren't being told as well. I think sometimes they're told in piecemeal ways or only in local communities. A lot of these connections are known about. But I think
It's strange. This is a bit of how I sit in two worlds, right? Like as a PhD student, we're all trained in research methods, and we're taught to rely solely on data that are reliable and robust and can be generalized to all sorts of different contexts. And that's useful for scholarship purposes, but I think educators, even those working in the colleges, sometimes make the erroneous assumptions that data are going to change people's minds or get them to invest more heavily in our institutions. One thing that college leaders and others really can do is to tell stories about the impact that their colleges and their students are having in the world. People want to hear stories about how community colleges have transformed the lives of, 50-year-old workers who've lost their jobs to AI and have gone back for upskilling. Or, legislators want to hear stories of how on campus childcare centers have allowed single mothers to go back to school and earn a credit at a time until they get a certificate and can enter the skilled technical workforce. Um, Certainly, they want to hear stories about how Lockheed Martin or Google or State Farm or Apple have built new facilities or new offices in various cities because the community colleges there have prepared to train the workforce that they need for, to power those facilities. So these are things that are happening every day. Some of them are structural. We have to build these relationships and build these programs. But a lot of it is really, um, telling stories about what we're doing and why it is so important for the lives not only of the individuals attending community colleges, but for creating more prosperous and equitable futures for our communities as well.
I agree with you. And it also fosters a level of understanding
Mhm.
as well that I think is really important because as you and I talked about earlier on too, is a lot of times there's a gap and biases, whether it comes to community colleges or anything, because there's a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
And so through telling stories, it's such a powerful way to say, this is what it's really like. This is what's really going on. These are my experiences. Look at me as an individual, not just a number
Yeah.
or just tied to a name on a school building
Yeah.
that then goes, oh, okay. And everyone as a community, and not just immediate community, but larger community, will start to change and reframe their mindset when it comes to hearing certain words. And I think that's important as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Carrie, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm on LinkedIn. I think you said earlier under Carrie Kisker, Kisker. You can also find me at kiskeredconsulting.com, ed being short for education. And you can find the Center for the Study of Community Colleges, which is the nonprofit organization I run at centerforcommunitycolleges.org.
Thank you, Carrie, for all of your insight today.
Thank you for this conversation and for your fantastic questions.
Well, a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation and your very thoughtful and intellectual answers to those questions include: let the job and your experience speak for itself, especially when you're going into certain rooms, whether it be due to experience, whatever it might be, as Carrie mentioned in the beginning with her own story. It's letting her work speak for itself to let those doors open other doors. And sometimes, as Carrie mentioned in her story, it's also understanding the power of mentorship and having the conversations and demonstrating you have the skill set. Because if you could walk in a room and potentially talk about something or lean into something, then people will be able to go, oh, the proof is in the pudding. Okay, next thing. As well as we can help eliminate community college stigmas by moving a resume higher in the pile instead of lower in the pile because of a name. And Carrie said this earlier and it tied right into it, is maybe asking when you're seeing that name on the page and you're seeing the bullet points of their experiences, like, what else was going on? What's their story? What experience did they get out of being in that situation? Whether whatever it might be, and say, this should deserve, and I have the power to give that a time and a conversation instead of just putting it in the no pile. As well as check your biases. What is their story? As well as tell your community college story. And that's a challenge I want to give anyone listening today that has been a part of a college community, is get aligned, tell your story to your peers, and really be proud of where you came from and highlight your story in that, and how community colleges played a role in your journey. And as well as to be successful in entrepreneurial community college, hold tight to your community college goals and where you want to be and how you want to move forward in acting. Carrie brought up some great examples in that. And lastly, bring current events into the classroom. And I love how Carrie brought up those examples of what we can really be implementing today. But that being said, I think they're all great examples, especially with the world of like Netflix, Prime, and people not taking the time to maybe watch the news as much. And that's a great thing that all of us could do, to take time out of our day every day to read one current event that's going on and think through it as we're reading it, on how it can affect us. What can we do to help? How can we relate this to our own experiences? So whether it's in a classroom or outside the classroom, I think we all need to stay more current on the current events that are happening in this world. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Dr. Carrie Kisker. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.